Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all the attendees to this installment of the Lexsynergy webinar series. My name is Marina Robbins, and I am the Marketing Manager at Lexsynergy. For those of you not familiar with us, Lexsynergy is a global domain management and online brand protection company with offices in the UK, US, South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Australia. We are pleased you joined us for today's presentation, and we hope you find this information useful. On this webinar, we will be discussing what steps startups and companies launching new brands need to take in relation to domains and protecting their new business online. We will answer questions such as when is the right time to register domains, how to determine which domain extensions to register, and strategies for keeping your new brand safe prior to, during, and after launch. We will leave some time at the end of the presentation for questions, so if you have a question, please send those using the Q&A function on the WebEx. I would now like to introduce Sunny Yadu, the presenter for today's webinar. Sunny is a lawyer and brand protection specialist at Lexsynergy. Sunny has over 4 years' experience in the domain and IP industry. Prior to joining Lexsynergy, he dealt with contentious civil litigation within the UK. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Sunny to start the presentation.
Thank you, Marina, and welcome to everyone that's logged in. And I would just like to start off with the agenda for this webinar. We'll be addressing domain name strategy and policy, the best time to register a domain name, choosing the correct domain extensions, and how to protect your brand throughout a launch. So we'll start off with the first slide here, which is creating a domain strategy and policy. An important guidance document for all organizations during a launch needs to be the domain strategy and policy. This will assist the business to decide on the best way forward from a domain name perspective upon the launch of a new brand. Having a policy and strategy in place will ensure a uniform and clear approach to domain registrations and will avoid confusion, going overboard with registrations, and registering unnecessary variations in odd jurisdictions. The policy and strategy document should address 7 main things. This is the process for registering, renewing, and managing the domain names, as well as managing the technical aspects of the domain. Who should have access to domain names, how to access these domain names, login details, and all the other management aspects of domain names. It should also address the annual budget available to the business unit for domain registrations and renewals. This is quite important so that when the document is circulated between different departments such as legal, marketing, or IT, there's no confusion as to the core domain name registrations and whether that's within the budget or not. The third point is the timing of the registrations. Ideally, domain names should be registered before your trademark application or press announcement. And I'll touch on this a bit later to go into a bit more detail. And then following that, we'd need to look at how infringements are processed. So certain infringements may be more severe than others and may need to be tackled immediately, such as phishing sites or copyright or trademark infringements. Whereas other infringements, such as domain registrations with no website content, may not be so severe, and it may be best to leave it and just monitor. So the document would essentially need to address how the business unit or the different department would need to address each type of infringement, maybe have like a severity scale, and based on that severity scale, a set of options or a set of actions need to be taken to resolve that issue. The policy should also look at IPR mechanics in order to mitigate risks. So there's 2 main blocking services or risk mitigation services out there, which is the domain block, and this is a service offered by Donuts and Minds and Machines, who are 2 of the largest domain registries for the new GTLDs out there. The block essentially allows trademark holders to block an exact match of their trademark in over 270 of the new GTLDs. So the block blocks an exact match, as I said, and this prevents third parties from registering an exact match of your trademark within the set list of TLDs launched by donors and minds and machines. It's important to note that it doesn't cover existing registrations, and it only covers future registrations, and it also covers all future extensions launched by donors and minds and machines. It's also important to note that it can only be overridden by another trademark holder, so that gives the brand owner peace of mind knowing that if another trademark holder does override it, then it's going to be for legitimate use. The second mechanism is the TMCH. This is essentially what will happen essentially via TMCH agents such as Lexsynergy. Brand owners can validate their trademark with the TMCH. This gives the brand holder two main benefits. The first one is the priority in the sunrise phase, which allows you to participate in the launch of new GTLDs and gives you like a priority over other organizations who don't have trademarks maybe, and allows you to secure your trademark in that new extension in a priority basis. The second thing is the notifications that are sent out by the TMCH to the brand holders, and this notifies the brand holders of third-party registrations for an exact match of that trademark in the new GTLD space only. And I'll come on later to talk about other notification and watch procedures that cover more than just the extensions within the GTLD space. And then we need to look, then the policy should also address how to detect infringements. So the domain name watch service is one service that can be put in place to pick up future infringements within the domain name space. Generally, most watch reports, and particularly the one offered by Lexsynergy, does cover all infringements in the new GTLD space, as well as all domain registrations in over 400 country codes. Whether the watch service should cover typo squatting, misspellings, etc., that should also be addressed within the policy document. When drafting the strategy and policy document, factors such as the corporate structure, market presence, competition, commercial objections, and business strategy should also be taken into account, as this will form a sound and clear domain strategy which can be followed by the business. It's also important to note that while compiling this strategy and policy document, input needs to be obtained and received from different departments within the business, such as legal, marketing, and technical. So the legal department may, put their input on which domain names to recover, their trademarks, and which registrations should marry up with the trademarks. The marketing department may look at, what kind of registrations or extensions they may need to market effectively, and the technical department may look at which domain names need to be forwarded, the settings and the DNS records, etc., of domain names. So just going on to the next slide, the timing of a domain registration is also quite crucial. So at what point should you, during the launch, register the domain name? Just some preamble here. So domain names are obviously very important in today's business world. The majority of businesses have an online presence as opposed to a physical presence. And this has made domain names very important, and some even consider it as important as a trademark, and may even refer to it as your online trademark. Without a domain name and a website in the correct extension, it can be difficult to market your services or reach your target audience. The first thing the business would need to consider is what kind of domain name they want. So generally, you should go for the .com. This is the most commercially viable domain name. And then also look at country code extensions and, extensions within the industry maybe, but I'll go into that a bit later on. So when should you register your domain name? So domain name should essentially be registered prior to filing a trademark, and that is because trademark databases are monitored by squatters. For example, if you do file your trademark first, a squatter can easily pick up this and then proceed to register the relevant domain that corresponds with your trademark in either the .com extension or in the local jurisdictional extension. Secondly, having to spend the time and money to have your trademark registered and then find out that the .com or the desired jurisdictional extension is taken can really affect strategy and marketing potential, and can mean that the business has maybe wasted money on the trademark or filing process. It's also important to note that domains should be registered prior to any announcements or press releases. This is because in addition to squatters monitoring trademark databases, they also monitor the press and media quite closely. And they monitor mainly for new press releases of new products, new services, mergers with other businesses, etc. Lexsynergy can always do suggest carrying out a domain availability search prior to filing a trademark to ensure that it is available and to ensure that the correct strategy is adapted for the launch of this brand. So what options are available if the domain name you want is not available? Essentially, this would be a domain acquisition. Before embarking on a domain acquisition process, it is important for the business to consider all alternatives and evaluate the risks associated with it. One option through the domain acquisition process is an anonymous approach. This is essentially attempting to purchase the domain via an alias. Whilst anonymous approaches may seem straightforward and can essentially be carried out by anyone, there are many steps involved and unique knowledge is required, such as transfer requirements for different extensions, the process of transferring it, when, how, and who needs to be involved in the transfer process, the escrow part of the transaction, how's the money going to be paid, who's going to hold the domain name, does the money need to be released before or after the domain registration, etc. It's therefore very important to use a domain registrar that has experience in domain acquisitions, negotiations, and escrow services. So how to choose the correct domain extension for your launch? Generally, .com is the most important extension. It's considered the king of extensions as it is one of the most widely used and oldest extensions in the domain name space. Many people do think it's an American-related extension, but it's not. It's actually short for commercial, and its original purpose was intended to be for commercial organizations. Other popular generic extensions are .net, .org, .biz, .info, and .mobi, and these sometimes are considered as alternatives to .com. However, in my opinion, they don't really trump the .com, and that is still the most widely used extension. Depending on where the business intends to go or trade in the direction of it, the business will need to consider country code extensions. So, for example, .co.uk for the United Kingdom, .fr for France, .es for Spain, .com.au for Australia. The extensions that need to be registered is going to depend on where the business intends to trade or operate in. And that is because the country extension is essentially what the local customer base will be going to. For example, if someone wanted to buy a product directly from Nike in India, they would go to nike.co.in or nike.in. And if that domain is essentially owned by a third party, it can cause loss of customer, revenue, or even have traffic diverted to competitors if the domain has been set up in that way. So securing your domain name within the relevant country extensions or where the trademark applications have been filed is extremely crucial. And then finally, there are other new GTLDs involved, and these include industry-specific extensions such as .bank for banks, .autos for business in the auto industry, .law for legal law firms, lawyers as well. There's also generic extensions such as .online, which was intended to be used for online businesses, essentially. And then there's region extensions such as .africa, .asia, and .london. Whilst they may not seem that important and, just another extension, looking at .africa, for example, it actually covers 54 of the African countries, so that's quite a large scope. .asia covers potentially 48 countries, and .london, being the commercial center of the UK, is also very important. If we then also have IDNs, which are internationalized domain names, and these are generally, Arabic, Chinese, Japanese extensions in the local extension or language. And then we also have high-risk extensions such as .sucks, .reviews, .xxx, and .porn. These four extensions are generally, not registered for businesses unless you're in that industry, but are more registered as defensive registrations to prevent third parties from securing it and then using the extension to either abuse the brand or portray the brand in a bad light, and associate them with industries that they perhaps don't want to be associated with. So protecting a brand during a launch. In conclusion, we've split up the necessary steps during the 3 phases of launch into pre-launch, during a launch, and post-launch. Prior to launching, the business will need to obviously refer to the domain strategy and policy document that we discussed in the initial slides. They'd need to make reference to everything and make sure everything is going as per the policy and as per the input from the different business units. They would need to consider the privacy services. Privacy services essentially protect your identity prior to a launch, as it hides the organization's contact information, so squatters and third parties do not know who registered the domain. As you may be aware, the GDPR was recently put into place on the 25th of May, and whilst the GDPR has made a lot of WHOIS information private, there are a lot of registries that still haven't redacted the information, and they're not obliged to, and they do have the details available on the public WHOIS. So it is important to look at privacy service to protect yourselves and to not reveal who is behind these domain registrations, as it can, be portrayed as or make squatters, figure out who is behind these registrations, and then they could register domains in certain jurisdictions, which may be an issue for you later on. The business would also need to look at the local presence requirements for certain extensions. For example, Tanzania, Germany, and France, they all have local presence requirements, and this means you need to have either a physical address or postal address within those countries, and Lexsynergy does assist in providing these local presence requirements for the majority of jurisdictions for our clients. And then during the launch, it's essential to ensure that all the secured domain registrations are pointed to or being dealt in the correct way as per the domain policy. So, for example, you may want, if the business was, targeting customers in, for example, India, Australia, and Japan, you may want those either websites at those extensions or those domain names, or have those domain names forwarding to your main.com website to ensure that all traffic from those countries or from those target audiences do go through to the correct place. So that's quite essential. And then finally, post-launch, it's looking at how to ensure your brand is sound on the internet and not squatted upon or infringed upon. And basically, the business would need to look at implementing a domain watch service, as mentioned before, the IPR mechanisms I also mentioned before, how to tackle infringements that do appear, and also, again, referring to the domain policy and strategy document on the severity and the actions as per the severity of the risk. And then consideration also needs to be given to new jurisdictions, new registrations as the business expands. Of course, the policy and the domain strategy would address this, but which countries they're expanding into, and if they are expanding, before any press release or announcement or trademark filing, secure those registrations, as well as any protection mechanisms that need to be considered. For example, putting in place the domain block or having a watch report to notify yourselves of the any infringements within that country. And finally, that brings the webinar to a conclusion. I hope that's shed some light on how businesses should approach domain registrations during a new launch or brand launch or expansion into a new jurisdiction. And at that point, I'll just check if there's been any questions on the webinar.
Yes, it looks like so far we have one question. It is, does filing a trademark after a domain registration and showing intention to use that name give you prior rights to a domain name while attempting to recover?
Okay, so in answer to that, filing a trademark after domain registration does not give you the rights, unfortunately. In order to be able to recover a domain name, there's 3 points, and one of them is to show prior rights to a domain name. So filing a trademark after the event doesn't give the brand owner or the trademark filer rights to a domain name that was registered maybe 5 or 6 years ago. However, there are some exceptions in which you'd need to maybe correspond if there is maybe some likelihood that they are targeting you, and that is like maybe a week or a month before your press announcement, it may be worth investigating. But essentially, it doesn't give you it doesn't give you rights to the domain name, and that is also known as reverse domain name hijacking, which is one of the defenses to a UDRP complaint. So, so yeah, always file your trademarks prior to at the domain registration or just prior, so that you do have rights to the domain names you want, or if you want to acquire a domain name, the best way is to maybe buy it through an anonymous approach. Are there any other questions, Marina? Or
It looks like that's the only one.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for watching, for listening. And if there are any other questions, you can contact us at support@lexsynergy.com. Thanks for listening, and this concludes the webinar.